President Biden, Rev, also speaking to our collective humanity, for lack of a better description. Let's listen. We'll talk about it on the other side.
So many of them never thought they'd ever be out of work in the first place. And just like my dad did when he used to lie awake at night when I was a kid, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep because he worried about whether or not he was about to lose his health care or whether we were going to have the money to pay the mortgage because of the economic circumstance he was in. And now a lot of these folks are facing eviction, are waiting hours in their cars, literally hours in their cars, waiting to be able to feed their children as they drive up to a food bank. It's the United States of America, and they're waiting to feed their kids. This cannot be who we are as a country. These are not the values of our nation. We will not let people go hungry.
Such an unbelievable commentary that this is what the Republicans want to leave in place. A country where, for no fault of their own, people who pre-pandemic obviously had jobs, good jobs, if you look at the abrupt shift in their circumstances, but now because of the pandemic and because of the last White House's failure to contain it or control it, need this kind of assistance. What do you think about the effort on the president's part to go straight to public sentiment and try to move public sentiment in his direction?
Well, that is clearly the appropriate and I think proper way to deal with this. What impressed me about what President Biden did today is to not frame this as Biden against Trump. We had that election, Trump lost. Let's get that out of the way. This is hunger. We're talking about citizens versus eviction. We've got to frame this as it is. In my work through National Action Network, we worked with Andre the Chef and others, giving out 1 million bags of food last year. And as I help do it twice a week, I'm looking at people that are really hungry. They don't care if a Republican or Democrat fed them. They need food. We're looking at people that don't know if they're going to stay in their homes from 1 month to the next. And I think what President Biden did today was not only the responsibility of a commander-in-chief, it's the moral thing to do and the right thing to do. And how can anyone in this country not want to help other Americans that are facing hunger? People don't sit in cars, as he said, for hours to get food because they're trying to beat the system. They need the food. And somebody needs to break through the cynicism and make that case. And I think he did that today.
And Charlie, just to pick up on Yamisha's point about resistance, obviously the White House expected resistance. They put out a policy. They expect a process, and no one is more familiar with or has a higher threshold for the sausage making, if you will, than this president with his decades in the Senate and the role that he played in the Obama White House. Let me just show you Jen Psaki, I think, sort of framing their expectations for what this part of the process looks like.
This is exactly how it should work, George, and it feels maybe unfamiliar to many people, including even all of you. The President of the United States laid out his agenda, laid out his bold vision. There's going to be a discussion with members of Congress of both parties about where we go from here. They'll like some pieces, they won't like some pieces. We'll figure out what the sausage looks like when it comes out of the machine. But at the end of the day, he felt it was important to lay out his bold vision for not just COVID and addressing it, but also immigration, a crisis that also has been not addressed in many years and is long overdue.
Charlie, when I watched it a couple of times, it strikes me that we're used to covering a president whose his deepest entanglement with Congress was when he shut the government down. And I think that was Jared's doing. But I mean, 4 years we've covered a president who has no idea how legislation is passed. And his most intimate dealings with Congress, I really think the most drawn out period where he was dealing with them was when he shut the government down. This is a change in strategy.
Oh, it is a sea change. It's almost disorienting to see a president who's actually engaged in policy at this level. But I thought the President Biden, the key line was, we're in a national emergency and we should act like we're in a national emergency, because that's the key. Because you have all these born again fiscal conservatives in the Republican Party, and I have some sympathy for them. But Republicans have been willing in the past to spend money if they think that it's an emergency. They were willing to spend lots of money to end the Cold War, to fight the war on terror, the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan. They were willing to blow up the deficit in tax cuts. So the question is this really a national emergency? And if it is, and of course it is, then the rules are changed. And I think that he did a good job of pointing this out. Look, we have last 48 hours, we've had more than 8,000 Americans dead. The death toll is going to rise maybe as high as 600,000. We have millions of Americans out of work. We have this weird K-shaped recovery where, look, if you're in the stock market, you're doing well. But a lot of Americans are going hungry. And, one of the arguments you'll hear from Republicans is you don't want to spend this kind of money because it's a disincentive to work. Well, no, it is the pandemic that is the disincentive to work. It is the fact that we are asking people to engage in social distancing. So this is not, this is not a business as usual moment. So I think he's making this case. And I understand that Republicans are going to be concerned about the spending, but there is something highly ironic listening to Republicans being concerned about the debt when they just presided over the explosion of the national debt to the tune of $7 trillion under Donald Trump. But it was a powerful case that we need to act, and we need to act quickly.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.